tonight I have the pleasure of introducing a TASIS alumni and also our next speaker in the TASIS Speaker Series, Pontus Sirén. So Pontus Sirén is a consultant and he's a partner of the Innosight company, where he advises different firms and businesses on strategies they can adopt to promote innovation and also achieve growth. So Pontus Sirén is originally from Finland and he studied abroad. He first went at Hamilton College in New York, and where he earned a Bachelor in History. And then he studied at Glasgow University, and he also studied at the Helsinki School of Economics. He also studied International Relations at Cambridge University, where he also earned a Master's in Philosophy, and he graduated with honors. So before joining Innosight, Pontus Sirén was the CEO of a biotech company, Bioneris, where he co-authored the patent for treatment for cancer cachexia. And during his time at Bioneris, he wrote and published a couple of articles about sudden infant death syndrome and also cancer cachexia, and these articles were published in many scientific journals. So throughout his career, Mr. Sirén has worked in a variety of fields of industry, such as consumer and industrial goods, healthcare, logistics, retail, and banking. And we are extremely lucky to listen to his presentation tonight, so please welcome Pontus Sirén.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction. This is a story of how I went from sitting where you are this evening to standing where I am right now. Even though when I was here, we were sitting in a bubble and we had kind of folding metal chairs. So the story starts in '83 when I came to Montagnola in Switzerland with my family. I was 11 years old and I started TASIS, and I graduated at the ripe age of 16, and then I went on to college. And TASIS was, and I still think is, almost a dreamlike place. It's incredibly beautiful, you've got fantastic teachers, you've got individual attention, and it's sometimes easy to forget that you are kind of living in a dream. I mean, once you leave, you might notice that it is quite a unique and fantastic place, and I'm sure you know that already. But that's what I remember from TASIS. I remember wonderful teachers, a very intimate atmosphere, good friends. It was a fantastic place to be for those 6 years. And I think, you know, the lesson, if there is one, is to cherish those memories, because, you know, life is going to throw some difficult curveballs and challenges your direction. And having good memories from whatever period you have is a resource that you can then rely on if the going gets tough. If you advance one slide. And for me, the going got tough when I went to college at 16, and that's, you know, arguably a little bit too young. And I ended up in Hamilton, and full disclosure, was not my first choice. And I know a lot of you are looking at colleges and selecting colleges, and there's nothing wrong with Hamilton, by the way. It's a very good school. But I didn't really fit in. So for the next 3 years, I struggled to fit in, and I did very well academically and so on, but it wasn't easy for me. So it wasn't like a home like TASIS had been. So if there's a moral in that story, is even if you don't get into your preferred place, or you don't get into this, that, or the other, it's not the end of the world. Life goes on, and I'm still here talking to you, you know. So you'll have some tough moments inevitably. You know, you'll have curveballs, you'll have difficulty with admissions, and maybe you won't. Maybe you'll get exactly where you want to go. But I think when you're in a difficult place like I was for at least part of the 3.5 years, it's important to just keep going through. Because if you're in a tough place, you don't want to stop. So it's better to keep your chin up and move forward. And if you're given lemonades, like I was given a decent chunk in this case, you know, try to make something useful out of it. And at least don't close doors to yourself just because you're in a tough place because of whatever. And maybe it was partly your fault, maybe it was circumstance, maybe the stars weren't aligned. I'm sure in my case all those were true. But regardless, now I look back at it and I say, yeah, it was a little bit of a rough patch. It was probably a little bit too young. It wasn't an exact cultural fit. But, you know, life goes on and you move along. So, you know, don't let those curveballs or difficulties derail you. They are inevitable in life. They'll come and, you know, sometimes they'll be this, sometimes they'll be that. But as we were talking over dinner, you know, they will pass. It might take a year, it might take two, might have a tough time. But ultimately, what you can control is, are you going to give up? What are you going to do? How are you going to deal with the situation? My recommendation is, if you're in that spot, at least, you know, control the things you can control. You can control what you think about it, how you feel about it to some degree, and of course, how you move through it. And I'm not saying you should do that alone, but it is useful to kind of recognize if you're in a good spot, appreciate it, enjoy it. And if you're in a bad spot, decide how you're going to deal with that difficult situation. If we go to the next one. So after, I seem to have a penchant for these schools with old buildings. So next, I went to Glasgow University to study history. Actually, I majored in Russian and East European studies. And there I had a wonderful experience, partly because the program was so small. I think there were 5 of us, and I think there were 6 professors. So basically, we all had a private tutor for the year. And it was a 2-year program, but the weather in Glasgow was really rough. So I decided to finish it in 1. But not because I didn't like the program. The program was fantastic, but because I wanted to kind of do more things. And that was one thing we also talked about here is like, should you take a year off? Should you take some time off? Should you do other things that are not academic and that will advance you in the construction of the perfect CV? I'm a strong believer that you should. No one is going to care if you graduate at 18, 19, 20, or 21. Absolutely no one. I know I was super ambitious. I wanted to go, degree. No one cares how old you are when you get those degrees. So if there's something you like to do and you have the resources and the possibilities to do that, do something interesting in a gap year. Absolutely. Might be difficult to convince your parents. I think it's a good investment, a good use of time. As long as you do something, you know, if you just go party and boozing, not my recommendation. If you do something that develops you and you see the world and you meet some new people, you maybe do something useful for other people, volunteering or whatever, as part of the equation, that could be extremely educational. You realize that you learn a lot more also, well, I don't think you learn more. You learn a lot outside the classroom, as we all know. So there's no debate about that. So spending some time outside the classroom and giving yourself a little bit of space to see the world and to learn about other things that you will not learn in the classroom is, I think, time very well spent. Anyway, so I finished my degrees, and I'm thinking here, what am I going to do when I grow up? Well, I thought, okay, I've studied history, international relations, this and that. I'll go and become some kind of, you know, bureaucrat somewhere. Why not? So if we go to the next slide. So then I went to Cambridge, and I studied more international relations because I hadn't studied enough by then. So I thought I needed another degree, which we may debate the merits of that. But one thing I would say is that it is useful in your career at some point to get some blue chip experience on your resume, because the world is not a perfect place. And people will look at something you've done and some school you've been to, and they'll judge you on that. So if you have the opportunity, and it doesn't really matter where you do it, but it's useful to have some things that have reputation, for lack of a better word. And it's not always possible. It's not the end of the world if you don't. But if you can, it's handy. Now, Cambridge, and I speak very openly because I think otherwise it's a waste of your time if I don't. Cambridge is one of those places. And I love Cambridge. It's a fantastic place and great teachers and all the rest of it. But arguably the most important thing was the reputation, because it opens doors. Okay. So then I say, okay, I'm going to go and become an EU bureaucrat in Brussels. Why not? They've got long vacations and good pay. I thought it could be interesting. So we visit Brussels, and we meet this guy. And he's a young guy. He's, you know, working in this department. And I asked him, so what are you doing? He says, I'm working on the banana trade war between Europe and South America. I said, okay, what does this debate entail? It says bananas, like how we price bananas, how we evaluate bananas, how we standardize bananas, and how we sell bananas. Bananas are very important, it turns out, as you might know, since you often eat them at breakfast. And I asked, how long have you been doing this? And this was in 95. And he said, I've been doing this for, I don't know, was it 3, 4 years? And I said, how long is this banana thing going to continue? He said, I have no idea, but it could be decades. And then it actually, I happened to read the paper. It was like 2012 or 13. They said the EU and the South American countries finally settled the banana war. So this guy and this unit has been doing the banana thing for like however many years. So second, this is the third piece of advice. If you get an interview in a place where they're working on bananas for more than 5 years, find a different job. So then I said, okay, I got to find a different job. But I was confused, full disclosure. I did not know what I should do, because my dreams of becoming an EU bureaucrat were mushed with the bananas. So I go to the Cambridge Career Center, and there's a computer. Now notice, this was in 95, so it's not like a sleek tablet. This is like a big, like a TV with a keyboard. And so you answer some questions. What do you like to do, and this and that. And the computer spits out a list. Voila. And the computer told me to be a military attaché, a radio show host, or a strategy consultant. And I said, brilliant. I kind of know what the other two do, but I've never heard of strategy consulting. So I took some papers, I read some literature on strategy consulting. I said, this sounds interesting. It's like military strategy for business. Why not? Could be interesting. And then I just started to apply to a whole bunch of places, and I got a couple of jobs actually in the UK. But then kind of chance intervened, and this company called BCG, Boston Consulting Group, invited me for an interview. Does anyone know BCG? Okay, a couple of you know BCG. So there's 3 elite consulting companies in the world. There's McKinsey, there's BCG, and there's Bain. These are like the elite advisors of the top corporate leaders in the world. And I didn't know anything about them because I was just a history dude. And they invited me to an interview. And the only thing I remember thinking was, these guys must be doing pretty well because the offices are really nice. Like, they have really nice offices. And I thought, they must be doing pretty well. But it seems like a good business. And I didn't know anything about fixed or variable costs, about, I had never studied economics, zero. But it was strategy, how do you do this, that, and the other. It's not rocket science. And after 9 interviews, they hired me. Okay. So here I was. I had just joined BCG, and you have to know that if you know consulting, though, BCG, especially the Nordic system, they only hire people with MBAs, doctorates in physics, or the top engineers in all of those countries. And they hire the top 1% in each one of those disciplines. So there I was trying to make my way through, and the first 2 weeks, I said, I said to one of my friends, I think this is going to be really painful because I'd never used Excel. I mean, the only thing they use is Excel. Anyway, for the next 3 years, I was, mentally like, I don't know what the right word is, ground up, mushed with the bananas or other exotic fruits. I was exhausted. I was so exhausted that I had nightmares of being stuck in an endless Excel file, running up and down and never escaping. So if you want like real exhaustion, I experienced that. But, I said that, you decide if you give up. And I wasn't going to give up. I said, they can fire me, they can do whatever, but I'm not going to give up. But I was, to put it bluntly, moderately tired. Actually, we can go to the next slide because that's Stockholm, where I started. Anyway, I was pretty close to breaking point, I think. I was pretty close. But then it turns out that the Finnish, government wants, people like me to do military service. And I had deferred. I was 28. So I go do my national service. And national service in Finland is compulsory. Everyone has to do it. And usually you're 18. I was 28. And not to make light of it, but I had a blast. It's because there's it's like young guys. There's hundreds of them. They're from all over the society. Everyone is different. And, everyone gets trained the same, and, a lot of very funny things happen. I mean, there's a lot of situational comedy. If you've never been in basic training, you may not appreciate that, but there's a lot of kind of silliness also. Anyway, after that, I came back to BCG. I was like revitalized. I had been like on this exercise regime. And by the way, you don't have to think in the Army. They tell you, eat, run, sleep, push-ups, shoot, do it again, right? So my brain was completely revitalized. I went back to BCG, was there for another 2.5 years, got promoted to project leader and said, okay, that's it, I'm tapping out, I'm done. So the other lesson, I guess, if there is one, is, you can do a lot more than you think. Like, you limit yourself, we limit ourselves, and I limited myself, I'm sure. But you know, you're capable of a lot more, even things that you think are ultra difficult, because it's your own head telling you, oh, I can't do that, oh, this is difficult, oh, I'm nervous. But a lot of it is just mental projection. And I'm not saying to do that stuff. I mean, this is not career advice. This is a cautionary tale of how not to run your, your early years. But you know, there is like, you know, there's a lot of value in tenacity. And also, by the way, sometimes you need to give up and change direction. You don't want to do stuff that's not right for you and so on. But make that judgment carefully, you know, when you give up or when you change. I mean, even the word give up is probably the wrong word, but when you change course. I had decided that I was going to prove to everyone that I can do this bloody consulting job. I was determined to do it, and I did it. Again, was it the most, you know, best choice for my mental sanity? Probably not, but anyway, I made it through. Okay, next slide, please. After this consulting experience, which lasted for 5.5 years, I wanted more challenges in my life because I had decided that life was not difficult enough in consulting. So I went and founded a biotech company called Bioneris with the Karolinska Institute, which some of you may know is the biggest research university in the Nordics. And there was this project, they needed someone to lead it, and I joined. And I was just going to be the business guy. My job was going to be just business, fundraising, talking to investors, and this and that. But it turns out that in a startup, you have to do everything. So after about 4 years, when we were running out of money and running out of ideas, I got involved in the business, well, not the business, the task of actually doing scientific research. Now, my highest qualification in biology is AP Biology, who I had a chance of meeting this afternoon. So I have no formal education. But because we were kind of in a desperate situation, I ended up publishing quite a bit. If we go to the next slide. Most recently in Nature Pediatric Research this year, actually, these 2 letters to the editor, which pertain to this piece of research that was tangentially related. So the point is, again, you can do a lot more than your degree. Whatever you choose to do, your degree does not define what you can and can't do. You can do a lot more, and you can do different things, and I recommend you do different things. And I believe that we are entering the age of the generalist. You know, we've been all saying you need to be an accountant or a dentist or this and that. I'm a big believer in being a generalist, probably because I'm a generalist myself. It's maybe a little bit of a harder road because you don't have a ready position immediately. But I think a lot of interesting things happen at intersections. And TASIS is wonderful because you get an intersection of everything. You get history and culture, and you get a great education in many things. The problem is once you go to university, you're going to be laser focused on whatever, the left molar. So find ways to educate yourself broadly, because when you have a broad education, you can combine things in ways which other people can't. And that can be extremely valuable. And I still do this science stuff as a hobby, and it's super interesting. And I think we should all have a basic education in biology and all of those topics. But again, don't let your degrees or this or that define you. You can do a lot of things outside the specific field you choose to focus in. Okay, next. So then enter, but by the way, the story for the biotech company, we were never able to commercialize it. We had to close it down, and the company I'd worked for 9 years, I liquidated. So this is not like a huge success story. Like I said, it's more of a cautionary tale. So I was there, I was 38, I think, yeah, 38. And I was like, okay, now I got to choose a career again. So I was like, I've been here before, this is painful. But during my time when I was doing the biotech thing, I also did an MBA at the Helsinki School of Economics, and I ran into the work of Professor Clayton Christensen. And when I finished it, one of my friends said, why don't you apply for Innosight? And Innosight is a company that advises very large corporates on how not to go extinct. And the question Clay asked some 20 years ago was, why do successful companies fail? And if you want to know that, you can join us for drinks or whatever they serve in Casa Fleming. But successful companies do fail, which is quite bizarre, because they've got all the money, they've got all the customers, and they've got everything, and they still fail. Like, how is that possible? And it's not because they have bad management. Anyway, this is a picture of a couple of my colleagues from Singapore. This is a picture of of a HBR, Harvard Business Review article which was published in January, and the title is this ominous, how do you persuade your company to change before it's too late? And every company needs to change. And some need to change more urgently than others. And I'll just give one example of some of the IP that we work on, but there's this paradox that as you get more information, your freedom of action declines, right? And we all like information, right? That's a good thing to have. We all like freedom of information, that's nice, but, or freedom of action rather, but the problem is that as you get more information, there's less and less you can do with it. Think about investing. If you have perfect information about a certain stock, you're not probably going to make any money on that because it's already priced in. So the question is, one question we help companies with is, how do you deal with this paradox? Like, how do leaders make consequential decisions with imperfect information? That's very difficult. And if you are ever a leader, I'll just say one more thing on this. If you're a leader, let's say of a large company, let's say you get a sense that the market is changing. Let's say you get a sense that you need to change your company. There's three things you need to do. The first is you need to figure out what to do. That can be quite difficult because, again, you don't have perfect information. Second, you got to convince yourself that you're going to go through the pain of changing this company because no one is going to believe you immediately. And then third, you've got to convince everyone else. And that's why being a leader in these days, this day and age, is super difficult. Because if you have perfect information, you don't need any leadership, right? You just look at the data and you do what the data tells you. But what leaders actually have to do is they have to take action before the data is in. And that's easier said than done. I've got one slide left. And I will take a, wait, one more. I will take a refreshing sip of water before we continue. When I was asked to come here, they said that, I would share some examples of my success. Now, having listened to that story, we may question if the audience has been misled by that. As I said, this might be more of a cautionary tale. And, in my career, I've had some interesting thoughts. I've published in some high-profile papers. I've gained some material wealth. I've been promoted. I've done this. I've done that. Those are all, those are all good things. I've tried to contribute. I've tried to, help the companies I've been advising, and so on and so forth. And is that success? Is it success that I've got impressive academic credentials? That I've had, famous things on my CV that at least kindly read off? That I've been in a couple of famous universities? Is that success, would you say? Is that what you want? And I'm not saying you shouldn't want them. Those are useful and important things. They're not bad things for sure. But what is success? If you look around, success is other people and how you treat them and how you deal with them. If you go to the next slide. This is success. And I haven't told you anything about how I got here. But this is success. It's other people and your life. It's not like fancy this or that. It's not even how much money you make. After a certain point, more doesn't move the needle. Like after a certain point, more doesn't move the needle. After enough fancy restaurants, the next one doesn't matter. I've been on business class flights hundreds, maybe thousands of times. I have millions and millions of flight miles. Does that matter? Is that success? Absolutely not. I was just saying that I'm in some kind of carbon hell anyway, but I mean that is not the point in my mind of life. Life is about this. It's about the people and how you treat them and how you spend time together. Time is going to go tick-tock, tick-tock. I know you're young and everyone is, but time goes very quickly. So find time to do the things that matter. I'm not saying don't work, don't build a career, don't be successful, don't make money. Of course, do all that. That's useful and good. But this is success in my mind. Thank you.
We have a question right here.
All right.
Will you say it loud?
Go for it.
Why do successful companies fail?
Oh, are you sitting comfortably? Your friend and colleague asked the question, why do successful companies fail? I will describe this very, very briefly. The challenge is that companies are designed to execute against a certain business model. A business model is simply how you capture, create, and deliver value. And usually there is a performance criteria you are trying to work towards. Let me give you a practical example. Insulin was developed in the 1920s. Banting and Best, two Canadians who got a Nobel Prize for it. And it's actually made from the pancreases of pigs, right? Now, when you produce insulin at industrial scale, there are impurities in it. Originally, about 50 parts per million. Now, when you administer that insulin to patients, they often get allergic reactions because it's got these impurities. So Eli Lilly, which is a very big American company, went into the business of creating more and more pure insulin, so we would have less and less allergic reactions at industrial scale. Everyone with me? In 1970, there were only 10 parts per million impurities in Eli Lilly insulin. So practically nothing, right? It was practically pure insulin, but they still had this 10 parts. And they had, by the way, made billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in the process of getting this right. So what do you think Eli Lilly did next? What would you predict? They had for 50 years perfected the process of mass producing clean insulin. What did they do next?
They raised the prices.
Sorry?
They raised the prices.
No, they didn't. They could have though, but that doesn't always work.
They kept trying to perfect it?
Yes, they kept trying to make it more and more pure. Now, how do you do that? The way you do that is you buy a company or the license from Genentech, I think it was, which was where they had the ability to make synthetic insulin. So there was no animal parts involved anymore. Now, what was the problem? Why did they lose that market? I mean, they were making better insulin. It was 0%, 0 parts impurities, but they lost the market. Why would you think they lost it? Because the customers didn't care about it anymore. 10 parts per million was clean enough. So when they perfected it to 0, it was like, who cares? Doesn't matter. What do you think the customers and especially the patients cared about?
Affordability.
Affordability, yes, but assuming that in many parts this was paid by insurance or healthcare and so on, assume we're talking about the Western markets, 1980s still so. But of course they always care about that, but there was something else they cared about more. They cared about the speed of administration. So the basis of competition switched from the purity of the product, which was good enough, to the speed of administration. And a small Danish company called Novo Nordisk developed and perfected the insulin pen, which made administering insulin very easy and quick. And they took the market. And Lilly went from 40% market share to 20% market share, and Novo Nordisk went from 10 to 40, and Novo is now the biggest one. And this happens every time. Imagine, does your car need to have 10,000 horsepower? Would you care if it had 10,000 horsepower? What do you care about now if you buy a car? You don't buy cars anymore, but if you were to buy a car. Let's say you care about its green credentials, right? So what company that was a complete newcomer leveraged that desire for people to have green credentials? Tesla, right? And so in every industry, at a certain point, the performance the company delivers overshoots what the market wants, and then the people don't care about that anymore, and then they care about something else, and then another company steals the market. And that's what is the answer to your question. In a nutshell, because I don't want to keep you here too long. All right, other questions? Don't be shy. Anyone know what is interested in consulting, biotech, innovation, failed college applications? Go ahead.
How does one just learn consulting? Because you don't get a degree in that, right? So how do you learn that?
Yeah, it's a good question. How do you learn consulting? I mean, I think you learn consulting by doing consulting. You have to be, willing to work very hard. It's good if you're good in math. It's good if you know something about business, and then you go and work for a consulting company. And basically, like, we hire people who have good, for lack of a better word, horsepower, good intellectual horsepower, because then anyway you need to teach them all this stuff. But it's not rocket science. I mean, there's nothing complicated in business. It might be sometimes, complex, but it's not inherently complicated. I mean, companies compete, they've got business models, that changes, blah, 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 blah. But you need intellectual horsepower to quickly absorb and to be able to apply it. There was a hand here.
I saw what you said about how companies, like big companies can fail. Do you think that eventually all companies reach a point where they should fail? Because everything's always evolving, things are changing, so you constantly come up with new ideas to improve the company.
When you say should fail, like from a moral perspective, or?
No,
They do fail.
Are destined to
Yes,
fail.
yes, they are destined to fail. If you look at the companies that were around 100 years ago, take the S&P 100 years ago, they're all gone. GE was the last one, and they blew up pretty much. IBM, who was untouchable 30 years ago, is a shadow of its former self, et cetera, et cetera. Look at the big companies now. I mean, if you look at the S&P, look at them 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they're all gone. I mean, Nokia from Finland. I mean, at one point, they were selling 1 billion phones. They had 1 billion, like that one. They had billions and billions of customers, right? And they're basically now just a network company. And I mean, the list is very long. So one thing I would also say is success and power is transient. And it contains within itself its own downfall. Because if you work with large companies, boy, are they bureaucratic. And boy, are they slow. And boy, do you need to have 15 people in every decision. So, I mean, I advise them. They're very talented people. They're not, and they're certainly, most of them are good, just normal people. But when the machine grows and grows and grows, often it becomes so intricate that it just trips over itself. So one thing I've learned is that both success and failure are transitory. It's just a question of, where do you happen to fall in your life or your career? You might fall in a country or in a company that's on the ascendancy. And those are happy days. And you're like, wow, we are really smart. We're super smart. Look at us. We're just rocking and rolling. Or you might be in a company, country, whatever it is, organization that's on the downtrend. And then you're like, oh, we can't do anything. So I've developed a little bit of a philosophical bent to this. There is no permanence in human affairs. Certainly not in business. And if that's a good or bad thing, we can debate. Yes?
How do you convince a company, as an innovator, to change their ways if they're being stuck in their ways? How do you convince them to?
Yeah, that's very difficult. How do you convince them to change? Well, sometimes they ask in business, they ask what business, what does your company do? And one question they often ask is, do you sell vitamins or headache medicine? And the analogy is that people have to buy headache medicine, but they might buy vitamins. I said, we're not in either of those businesses. We're actually in the business of selling you the headache. Because dealing with these issues is a massive headache for any leader. How long do you think an average CEO stays in their position? How many years would you say?
Like 1.
4 or 5 years. Depends on the company, but 4 or 5 years. How long do you think it takes for this disruption to play out? I mean, these companies don't disappear overnight. Most CEOs can stay in their place without doing anything, and it won't damage them personally. Right? It's easier often not to do something. And so that's why this is such a challenge, and that's why disruption is almost a force of nature. If you ask the practicalities, you have to convince them that the industry is changing, and it's changing in very predictable ways. Usually the primary drivers are new technology and new business models, and then you have to have endless meetings where you go through this, and you show them examples of how it's changed before. And that's why where my education history comes quite handy, because I always look at the past and you just say, look, this industry changed. Look at retail. Take retail. Was it a surprise that internet channels and selling and business models would at one point be an important factor. What would you say that's a surprise? Knowing what you know. No, you think it's quite obvious. Now, if a retailer comes to me today and says, could you please advise us on how to respond to this disruptive change, I would say, sure, give me a time machine, take me back to 2005, and I'll give you some advice. But today the game is over. There's nothing to do. If you do not have a robust omni-channel strategy, that's it. So, and it's not like all these retailers who are massively disrupted didn't know about the internet and didn't see that it was coming, but it's a slow change. These changes are always slow, and that's why responding to disruption is one of the biggest challenges that leaders face. It's not easy. It's not easy to advise them, and it's not easy for them to change. But it is an inevitability. Go ahead.
Why do you feel like we're moving away from the age of the specialist and into the age of the generalist?
Yeah, that's a good question. My hypothesis there is that the specialist can be relatively easily hired. So I worked in Asia for 10 years, and I traveled and worked in all those countries, India, China, Taiwan, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, and in between. So I've been in all those, and I'll include even Turkey in that exercise. You can get very, very skilled technical specialists for 1/10, 1/20, 1/30 of what it costs in the West. And they are rocking and rolling, and they're very high quality and high capacity, and they're motivated like you would not believe. Now, their big advantage is that they have gotten the education and infrastructure, et cetera, that we've enjoyed in the West for many decades, but they have a magic ingredient, and that's called grim determination to improve their lot. And motivation that I don't see anywhere in the West, really, in that degree and in that scale. And they will do something very predictable. They will get better at what they're doing, and they will be global in their reach because we can work, as you know. So you have to choose. If you're going to be a specialist, then you have to be hyper good at what you do, because that's your competition, at least partially. Or you can do something that they won't do for a while, which is become a generalist who integrates and then leverages specialists to get something done. Now, I'm not saying being a generalist is very easy, because it takes time to learn a broad set of skills that are useful. But I just think that whole market is shifting, and labor is mobile. Now, if we all work virtually anyway, it doesn't matter where you're based. Go ahead.
Would you say that patience or impatience were the determining factor in your career?
Patience or impatience? I would say lack of planning was the determining factor. Like I said, I don't think this is a good way to do things. There's a lot easier ways to live life and to plan your career and to be a little bit more, systematic. I always did things that I thought were interesting, and I always pursued things that I thought, I could contribute to in some shape or form. But first of all, I think it's more interesting to look at my mistakes than my successes. I was very impatient when I was young. I wanted credentials and degrees and blah, 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 blah. Okay, could I have waited and enjoyed life a little bit more? Absolutely. And if I were to have a replay, that's what I would do. So that's one point. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I tried a whole bunch of different things. But I also have to say, you got to trust your instinct. Like when I went to BCG and I was going to say, I'm going to see this through. I don't care how much rain comes. I'm going to see this through. I had a very strong instinct that that's what I should do. When I did my biotech thing, I had a very strong instinct that even though this is somewhat miserable at times, at least, I just wanted to do it. I didn't care. But I also knew when to stop. Like when I left BCG, I had a very clear feeling, I'm done. I have nothing more to prove. I'm dusted. This is out. When I finished my biotech thing, I said, that's it. I'm done. Even when I left Singapore or made the decision 2 years ago, just before COVID hit, to leave Singapore, I had a very strong feeling, time to go. I don't know where it came from. But one thing I will say is I used to read a lot. Twitter has ruined that for me, so I blame Twitter. But I used to read a lot, and I read all subjects, history, science, didn't matter. when you put all that in your head, you develop almost like a sixth sense. You don't know why you make the decision. You just say, you know, I got to do this, and this feels right. So you got to listen also to your gut. Not blindly, but you got to listen to your gut and avoid some of the mistakes I made. But also, one mistake I made is you should get advice from people who are willing to help you. There are a lot of people who will give you good advice, certainly in this school and even in this room and everywhere around you. Get good advice. I didn't. So I made a lot of, you could say, stupid mistakes, which also kind of shaped me as a person. But get good advice. Talk to people. Talk to people. Talk to them about their experiences. Compare notes. That's how you, I'm not saying like, I don't wish that you don't have any adversity. Adversity shapes you. You know, it sculpts you. It forces you to discover who you are. So don't be afraid of adversity, because there's going to be adversity. 100% guaranteed. Sorry to ruin the evening. There will be adversity. Some of it minor, some of it major. But it also shapes you, and it can shape you in a positive way if you manage it. But don't try to do it alone as well. I think it's important. I think that's one mistake I made. I think it would be better to involve people who will give you good advice and support you. How are we doing with time?
We're doing very well as of this second.
Okay, excellent. So if there are a couple other questions, happy to take them. You just call time when.
I'm going to call time now, but I'm going to say this. If you would like to ask further questions, it's always really nice over at Casa Fleming. It's in a kind of a nice, comfortable atmosphere there, so please feel free to follow us over. Just come down here and let me know, and we'll walk over together. But before we do that, could we give Mr. Sirén a major round of applause?